Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera. I'm Dr. Suhana Jalil and I'm from Atomic Energy Licensing Board, Malaysia. And today I will present my thesis study entitled Naturally Occurring Radionuclides from Coal-Fired Power Plants in Malaysia. Due to economic and environmental factors with regard to this research, there are some items not to be shared and the informations are embargo. However, I truly hope that with this information that can be shared will benefit all of you in all particular that involve related parties with regard to this activity. There are 10 segments for my presentation outlines. So as an introduction, naturally occurring radioactive material receive highly local and international intention due to the waste generated, especially the ash and the particulate emission released from the stack. And coal itself, it's a naturally occurring radioactive material. It's an important material to generate energy, especially the electricity from the coal-fired power plants. So these issues need to be highlighted in order to obtain environmental sustainability, especially the importance to investigate the potential of environmental and radiological hazards. So this importance will help us to ensure safety of the public, the workers and the environment with this kind of activity. What is naturally occurring radioactive material norm? So basically, International Atomic Energy Agency define norm is a natural occurring material or natural origin that present in the natural sources material which undergoes several industrial processes that may give rise to the background of our radiation exposure. However, this concentration of naturally occurring radioactive material have no significant amounts from other radionuclides from the natural origins, such as our soil, our mineral and others. Even though coal is defined as one of the dirtiest fuel because it generates carbon hydroxide, it is still important for us to use for our electricity sustainability. With regard to this, the regulatory limit has been set in order to control this kind of activity in order to ensure the safety of the public, the workers and the environments. So here in Malaysia, the regulatory or the limit set for these two radionuclides of interest, there are uranium and thorium, are 1000 becquerel per gram. So it has been set as the clearance limit in our Malaysia Atomic Energy Licensing Radioactive Waste Management Regulation 2011. So as the background of the study, basically coal, as I mentioned before, is a naturally occurring radioactive material and it has been widely used as the source of energy in coal-fired power plant. So during the combustion process, it releases the particulate emission and also generate the ash. So with this kind of activity, it is believed may have impact to the occupational exposure to the worker and also will affect the environment. And how true is this? So we need to further study the coal, the ash and the particulate emission that being released from coal-fired power plant. Other than coal, there are several naturally occurring radioactive materials in Malaysia, such as the ferrum oxide for paint industry, the amang that is generated from the byproduct of tin, the tin slag from the metal production, the petroleum sludge that coming from the oil and gas exploration, and finally also coming from the pipe that being used in the oil and gas exploration activity. The problem statement of this study. The first one is we have lack of baseline data with regard to the use of coal, the generation of the ash, and the particulate emission being released from the coal-fired power plant. And then we also lack of the data of radiological hazards that pose hazard to workers publics and the environment. So, these findings are very important for the regulatory especially, and also the government of Malaysia, in order to enhance our national legislation framework. And we need this in order to ensure the safety of our people, our environment and our country itself. As we can see from the slide, there are 4 objectives for this study. So the scope of this study involved selected coal-fired power plants from Peninsular Malaysia and several environmental samples, and also measurement of exposure dose to the public. So the parameters include several as in the slide. For the methodology of this study, it involved power plant selection. Secondly, it involved sample collections, and finally the sample analysis. So for data collection, it involved the selection of coal-fired power plants from Peninsular Malaysia, and also the sample of coal, ash and particulate stack emission that being released from the stack. And the most important things that the particulate emission that being released from the stack can be released to the environment, and it being measured using the isokinetic sampling US EPA method 17. For the experimental, it involved several experimental from several government laboratories, from several government agencies. So for result and discussion, there are 3 main findings from the feed coal, the ash and the particulate emission. And it concludes that for the feed coal activity concentration, the coal concentration, that means the radioactivity level of the coal concentration, were within the control. The result of the ash and the particulate emission concentration that being released from the coal-fired power plants were found much higher than the coal, but it is still within the control limits. That means it still not exceed the regulatory limit set by our Act. So for the radiological hazards of this study, it being calculated from the input data that we obtained from this study, from the feed coal, the ash and the particulate emissions. So the result showed that the concentrations higher, and it increased the radiological hazards. However, it is still within the control limit. So the result also showed that the maximum concentration of the particulate emissions, that means the airborne that been released from the stack, are much lower than the result obtained from other countries. And it is shown that the particulate emission concentration that being released deposited at maximum of 1,600 meters away from the coal-fired power plants. According to the air dispersion modelling, the result showed that the particulate emission deposited at 1,600 meters away from the coal-fired power plants, and it showed that the activity is safe, and the result of the concentration of uranium and thorium far below than the regulatory limit. So the limitation of the study, basically not all coal-fired power plants in Malaysia were involved in the study, especially from Sabah and Sarawak, due to the cost and time constraint. However, the comprehensive study needed in a longer time of period to complete the process from all the cycle batch from the same parameters. And I also face limited research equipment and also high cost due to analysis, especially cost for analysis of the concentration of uranium and thorium using neutron activation analysis. And for the findings, coal contain naturally occurring radionuclides. However, the result recorded that it is in compliance with our national legislation and also international standard. So, secondly, successfully coal-fired power plant information will enable us to assist the management of the coal-fired power plant itself to purchase a good coal, especially with the low ash content. The radiological hazards of this study also found that it is acceptable and the ash is acceptable for the use in construction material. However, it needs a regulatory approval in order to use it as a consumer product. The radiological hazards and external radiation exposures from all coal-fired power plants is remote. And it also found out that the predicted ground level concentration, that means the deposition of the stacked particulate emission, was significantly lower than our national limits, and it does not impose any significant effect to the human population at large. And finally, the result presented that the radiological risk from inhalation due to the stacked particulate concentration released from the stack is significant. So the importance of the study, it is important to have a good knowledge in what is naturally occurring radioactive material in coal, in ash, and their potential enrichment. This justified data is needed as a baseline data in order to increase the public confidence and acceptance, and also to reduce a wrong perception of what is naturally occurring radioactive material. So the data and the findings of this study will enhance and strengthening our current national law, as well as to help the regulators and our government to develop the national policy on radioactive waste management. This is important in order towards ensuring the safety of the public, the workers, and the environment. As the conclusions and the implications on the government policies, the baseline data are important, especially from coal and the ash, as well as the particulate emissions has been successfully obtained for Peninsular Malaysia. So, it is a need to review our existing national legislation, that is our Atomic Energy Licensing Act 1984, and we are currently to focus on our new rang undang-undang berkaitan tenaga atom atau RUTA. In conjunction to this, there is a need to develop national radioactive waste management policies and strategies that include the naturally occurring radioactive material and the residues. Finally, there is a need to strengthen our regulatory control, especially in the area of naturally occurring radioactive material and its related activities. So, the rang undang-undang berkaitan tenaga atom, the regulatory research, the policies, and the international commitment is important in order to enhance the regulatory control of radioactive material in Malaysia. Thank you.